From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Night Show starring Nolan, where you join Nolan's guests with Matt and Greg Coffey to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the podcast. And last episode, we had the wonderful Bobby Figlio for the season 4 finale, and that was a big deal. And who better to have on than for the episode for season 5, the first episode, than these two guys themselves. Wonderful. For those who don't know, they host their own Beach Boys show on Facebook and Twitch and YouTube, and it's amazing. And as they say, you know, you don't have to be a big fan. You come in, learn all about it, and one day you can learn all this fun stuff and be a big fan themselves. This is so kind of them to reach to be able to do this, and I appreciate it. Man, Greg, how's it going?
Doing well. Good. How are you? Thanks for having us on the show.
Thank you, man. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I had when I was thinking, I forget when it was, and this is, you know, all honesty, when I had put this together, then when you guys had started your show, I was like, man, these guys, you know, not only are they informed about the group and like it and love it, and, you know, don't care that the group's, you know, 60 years old, but they love it, and they're passionate about it, and they've had so many great guests on that I said, man, the opportunity to have them on would be great, and hopefully, you know, follow in their footsteps in the sense of having the similar crowd on. So it's a big deal for me to have you both on. In any case, thanks, you know, man. The last 2 years have been interesting. They've been wild, insane, crazy. So for you, both of you, how's it been during this whole time?
You go ahead, brother.
Yeah, you know, it's been, I think it's one of those situations where when life gives you lemons kind of thing, right? And we were really lucky because Matt and I, we grew up with the Beach Boys, and it's something that we've always bonded over. And so kind of some other projects I was working on, I ended up getting all this kind of technology together, and the pandemic kept us all at home, right? So Matt and I remember just was talking on the phone, and our phone conversations kind of spill into Beach Boys, and we end up talking about the Beach Boys forever, you know, Beach Boy hypotheticals and what's kind of new with them. And so that kind of was, took up a lot of the pandemic time, was working on the show. And, you know, our whole first season was kind of prepped and then executed during the, when did we start? 2021? So like,
a year ago we did. Yeah.
But we started talking about it in 2020, and, but it's been a challenge, but like I said, I think it's given us an opportunity to kind of do this show and hang out with Beach Boy other fans just like us that we wouldn't normally get to do that. So it's been hard. It's been rough, but like I said, there's definitely some silver lining for sure.
Yeah. To piggyback on that, the quarantining and the, you know, working from home and stuff like that has had a, you know, a tough effect, I'm sure, on a lot of people, including myself and my brother. But like he said, one of the nice things about that was I had more time to really kind of re-listen again. I use that word reevaluate a lot, but, you know, listen to the Beach Boys again, which spurned a lot of our conversations. And one day on the phone, Greg was like, you know what, man? He's like, we should just do this online. You know, why not? We'll see what happens. And literally that's how it happened. And then from there it started. So, you know, like Greg said, you have to make the best of the situation. It was hard at times, but it was nice to really sit and kind of take in that beautiful music again, you know, that way. So that's how I spent a lot of my time.
You both sort of mentioned that, you know, to put it out online, you know, Billy Hinchy, for those who don't know, had his show, and he did that weekly to sort of, you know, stay in tune and sharp in terms of musically, but also share stories. For you, how much of that, you know, sort of concoction was not only, you know, to stay busy, but also, you know, to discuss the stuff online through that form of media to other people?
Yeah, well, I'll pass this to my brother, because I'll say he's a lot younger than me, and he's kind of more in with the you know, that platform. I like talking about the Beach Boys. I love the music. I love interviewing everybody. But as far as, you know, like Greg knowing that, hey, we could really do this, I think it might be a show that works. That's more him, you know, and I trust his judgment on that because he's an entertainer by trade and things like that. And so I think the Billy Hinchy show did help us in a lot of ways, because he was authentic, you know, and he would, you know, talk with his chat and call out his chat and things like that. So we use some of those things, but I think, Greg, I don't want to speak for you, but you were pretty kind of more familiar with those types of things, Twitch and Facebook Live and stuff, right?
Yeah. So Nolan, I'm sure you know, this isn't news to you because you're doing it too, but I have my microphone's gonna fall. I really, before doing the show, I was talking with some other industry friends of mine, and I think we all kind of came to the conclusion that I think live streaming is kind of the new frontier. I think it's the new telephone. I think it's the new television. And I think, no, were we really in early? No, not really. But I think if you put a product out there, you do it right, you put a lot of time and effort, energy into it. And I really think the sky's the limit, because all of a sudden you can create these hyper focused, hyper niche products or shows or whatever you want to call it that are to a very specific set of people. And we all know the Beach Boy community is a very specific set of people, but there are people out there that would love to hang out and watch and talk about the Beach Boys because they don't have an outlet anywhere else. So that's kind of how, you know, that kicked off. And then when we saw Billy Hinchy doing it, and this is completely true, I didn't know Billy Hinchy had a live show until we were maybe halfway through our season. I had no idea he was doing it, but watching him do it, and it was kind of mind blowing, because you're like, man, he gets it. He understands that it's a really cool medium, that you can share stories and keep yourself sharp. Like he said, that's a whole nother thing. But for me, it was really kind of, like I said, kind of getting your wagons and going out west and giving it a try, you know. And it's been really fun because you can connect with people on a much more like hyper focused level, as opposed to just, hey, I play music, blah blah. You know, it's I love the Beach Boys and specifically this music. You know, it's pretty cool to do that.
What I like about, I don't mean to interrupt. What I like about your show, your guys' show, is that, you know, there's other, you know, podcasts out there, or not necessarily Beach Boys, but shows out there that are really informational driven, or statistics or stuff like that, research driven, where it, you know, they're really on facts and dates and whatnot. And I feel like with yours, it's more of it's more of, you know, opinionated, which is good, which is good because it's not something where you're boring people out, and it's an easygoing environment where you're also allowed to have different views and stuff. How much for you, both of you, when you were putting this show together, was that important to you, in the sense of making everyone realize that you can have opinion whatever you wanted, but, you know, it doesn't matter?
Well, that kind of started, I'd say, my own opinion, with our phone conversations, because if you've seen some of our shows, I know you have, Greg and I don't agree on everything. We're probably equally Beach Boys fans, but we like different songs and different albums for different reasons. And, you know, kind of growing up, Greg and I were on an island in our family. We loved the Beach Boys, and everybody around us is like, I don't get it, you know? And so the idea of having a stream where we could share our thoughts, and, you know, at first it was a little bit like, can we do this? You know, we have the Many Moods of Matt segment sometimes, you know, where it may not be a popular opinion, and we didn't know if we could do that at first. But after a while, when you bring more people in, you find some people agree with you, some won't, but we can do it in a fun way. And I think one of the really nice things about our show is that when we go to the chat, and the chat gets to give their opinion, you know, we always say we're not the experts, the chat's the experts. And in most cases, that's the truth, you know, so we learn a lot from them. And so that makes it more comfortable for us. And, you know, it is a genuine, authentic thing. You know, when we do album reviews and things, we'll do some research and stuff, but we get things wrong, but it's okay. You know, it's about the music. We don't have to know every single historical fact. There's websites for that already, you know? So.
Yeah. Matt's so right on that. I think we almost go overboard we almost like over communicate that we set the bar really low, and that way, but it gives you kind of a sense of freedom. It's like, I never said I was a Beach Boy expert, and we're okay with that, because we're not, you know, we're not those fans. There are plenty of them out there, and a lot of them are in our chat, and they're awesome because they fill us in on who, the Brian Eichenberger guy. Like I had no idea who that was, but finding out, you know, that was really interesting to me. The other thing I'd say, Nolan, is, you know, I think Matt and I both wanted to make a really concerted effort going into the show of avoiding kind of any politics, and just kind of being relatively transparent. Like, look, we like all the Beach Boys. We don't have a camp. We just really enjoy their music. And that was one thing I noticed pretty quickly in the Beach Boy community that seemed like kind of lacking. You know, you're either a Brian guy or a Mike guy, and, you know, but but with us, it was, hey, can we create something that everybody can come to and kind of just enjoy the music and kind of be real positive, you know?
Yeah. Which is what I was thinking, which is what I want to ask you next, which is another thing I really like about your show is that you're very down the middle in the sense that you're not going to say a negative thing about this person or this person. And you may not like a specific album, but you stay down the middle and there's no bad blood, I think, against one specific group. How much for you, how important was that for you to not just from the beginning, but to still keep in the sense of you have someone like Carly who kind of let loose and set his mind on one part, but then you have someone like Ron Outback who's, you know, friends with Mike and is, you know, very complimentary of him.
That's a really good question. Yeah, it's been tough, right? Because you have folks on that they're speaking, they're telling you how they felt at the time. They're giving you an authentic feeling. Like Carly, he was there. He was literally there. He met people. And so the challenge for us is to, and we're not professional interviews. We're just people that like the Beach Boys. That's really all this is. Yeah. But it's a challenge to take it in, listen to it, accept it as what it is, but also don't go down, be careful of going down the rabbit hole of all of a sudden making that your experience and, you know, turning it into anything other than just some, it's a really good question, Nolan. It's been tough, tricky a couple times, but we try and keep it as light as we possibly can. To be
every
honest.
now and then we get some comments in the chat, you know, that might be negative towards somebody, or like you said, Carly was so authentic. I don't think he meant to be negative. Like Greg said, that was his lived experience. But I think that's one of the nice things about our show is that with our interviews, which full disclosure, we never dreamed in the beginning we'd have that many interviews with that many neat people in the Beach Boy world, but you do get very different perspectives on all the Beach Boys. And I think that's part of the thing that helps us kind of stay in the center and just show that we love it all. Because like you said, we had Ron Outback on, who's a big time Mike Love guy. You know, we've had on some Brian Wilson band members. We're going to have on some Mike Love band members in the future, you know, and just things like that. Because again, for Greg and I, it's about their legacy and it's about the music. We don't want to be salacious and get into all that stuff. That'll turn people off. And it's not what we're interested in. So
for you both, you mentioned, you know, who you've had on, who you plan to have in the future. I'm curious in that aspect, because that's something that, you know, is a big important thing for me to, you know, plan out who I want to have on, how to do it. Describe that process for you in terms of how far out you plan out who you want to have on, but also how much or what that list is in terms of who you want to have on.
Yeah, I got to kick this to Matt here, because Matt, everything that's cool in the show is pretty much Matt. So these guests we get, I don't know how Matt does it, so I'll let Matt kick it there.
You know, well, first of all, I haven't gotten all the guests. Let's be fair, but you know, I think what it is, for instance, Ron Outback was a guest that I got because I happen to love the MIU album, as you may know, and you know, Greg's not as into it, which is okay. There's different things. So I've read about it, I've listened to it, I knew about him, and you know, and it's one of those things. Once you have a show and it's the Beach Boys, it's like, what do we have to lose? You know, they can say no if they don't want to come on. And I feel like the more interviews that we've had, it's been easier just to kind of reach out and say, hey, we'd like you to come on. I said, you know, nothing salacious. We just want to talk to you about your experience in the music. And they, you know, we've had a lot of success. We've had a lot of positive feedback from our interviews from the folks that have come on the show. But, you know, in the Beach Boy world for 60 years, it's pretty apparent who the big hitters are, you know, other than the Beach Boys, and who the important writers are and things like that. And so we just kind of, Greg and I will talk about it together. We try to plan guests out. You know, we don't want to do it the week before. We try to see who we can get. Sometimes you don't get answers from people and sometimes you do. So you kind of plan it that way as well. But as far as that goes, I think just being a fan and knowing, you know, who we would like to talk to as fans is pretty much, honestly, that's what we do, you know, and get their stories, you know. Wouldn't you say so, Greg?
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to it is I think one thing, I don't know if we do that. I don't know if you do this on purpose, but I like that we seem to get folks on that are really important to the Beach Boys story and have a lot to share, but maybe haven't, for some reason or another, you don't necessarily see as much of them. And I'll give you a really good example. And I'm so glad we got Tommy Morgan on. So Tommy Morgan was a member of the Wrecking Crew, where he played harmonica. And, you know, it wasn't the most clear of interviews, but I mean, I wonder how many chances that guy's gotten to talk specifically Beach Boys.
Oh,
you know,
course,
I'm sure he's gotten so it's like, I think a lot of the folks we have on are, they're great people with wonderful experiences to share. And sometimes I wonder how often they have actually gotten a chance to throw that out there, you know. And I
that's
think
a great point, brother.
too.
Yeah, to give them a platform, you know. Again, Gary Griffin was another great example. What a great interview, you know. And he's been around and done so many things with the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson, and he loved it. Another one, Greg, that comes to mind when you mentioned Tommy Morgan was Tom Daly, who played John Daly, sorry, who played in Carl Wilson's solo band. He was a great interview, and I think he just loved that. Like you said, he was able to tell his story. So giving a platform to those folks that Greg and I believe are really, really crucial and important to the Beach Boys that may not get to tell their story so much.
And,
you know?
Right. But you wouldn't necessarily see them in like the mainstream Capitol, like Beach Boys biography, like Endless Harmony, or, you know, they wouldn't be in that. Yeah.
Is that sort of environment, does that keep you in the situation of pushing forward to get other people like that to, you know, have them share their story in order to, you know, show variety with your program?
Yeah. You know, we kind of think about it this way. We broke it up this way in one of our episodes. You know, we have musicians, of course, like band members, we have authors, and then we kind of have, you know, historians, and we kind of look at it that way. And we just kind of reach out to, you know, a great example. And this name's a bigger name, but, you know, David Leaf coming on our show was a very big thrill, you know, and he was willing to come on. But, you know, to me, he's the ultimate, you know, historian of the Beach Boys. You know, Peter Ames Carlin came on, who wrote a book. So it's kind of like, if we can get a more well-known name on, we're happy with that. And we're thrilled with that. But we're also very happy to get some of the band members that maybe aren't as well known, but are well known to us and well known to Beach Boy fans, you know. And so, as we plan guests for the future, we just think the same thing. You know, maybe one day we'll get a Beach Boy on, but you know, as Greg and I talk about, that's never really the goal of our show. The goal is to celebrate their music and why we love it, and give people a voice, you know, to talk about it.
Yeah, and just from like a purely production standpoint too, it's like, you know, a Beach Boy is one episode. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so unless you're planning on having one show and then it's done, you have to continue. So you have to create something that people are going to try and tune into, you know, and I can't believe people do now, but, you know, but you want to create stuff. And so it's important that you find the people out there that maybe aren't the Beach Boys, but they're a huge part of their story. And even like community members too, like Nolan, like, we need to have you on, man. You're awesome. We would kill to have you on. It's not really a status, or it's really more about just like fun content. It's going to be like, it's fun to talk Beach Boys. That doesn't matter who it is, or, you know, what they've done in their life. It's like, let's have fun, man. Let's enjoy the music and talk through it, you know?
Yeah. And one more thing, Nolan, is the other thing is just from the community aspect, when we're not on the show, like our Facebook group and stuff, a lot of these folks we've interviewed are part of our group now. Yeah. And they'll comment on posts, and when people give them comments, they write back. And I think that's neat for our community too, to actually get a note from some of these guys. And I think if I wasn't doing the show and I was a fan watching it and that happened to me, I'd be thrilled, you know? So I think that's a neat part of our community too, is that a lot of the people we interview stay in our community and stay involved with like us in the group, you know?
Matt, I remember the first time I got a phone call with Fred Vale. I was like shaking. Like I couldn't like believe I was talking to Fred Vale. But of course now for us, we've talked to him quite a bit, and not that it's any less of a thrill, but I'm definitely not like, I'm not shaking, you know? So it's pretty cool to talk to some of these folks that
and Nolan, he'd be a good guest, by the way, for your show.
I definitely have to put that in mind. I'll definitely write that down. You mentioned a phone call with Fred, and I know you've had a conversation with him on the show, I believe twice. Or at least maybe tried to. That brings apart a question I have, that in terms of preparation, and that's not about, you know, age for the guest and how old they are, but how much, and does it vary when you're getting someone to come on and they say, yes, I want to come on, and sort of walk them through what the show's about and what you plan on doing? Is there a lot that goes into each person, or is it depending on who it is?
I think a lot of it depends on, it's kind of situational. Some folks are just really, like, I don't know. That's a good, like, I wish I could say that every guest we have a really planned out, hey, this is, typically here's what we do. We say, hey, can we get like a biography?
Yeah.
And can we get a picture? The picture is for advertising. And then the biography is so that, hey, let's not say something that is stupid or, that's going to make us look really dumb. Because yes, we do claim to be relatively, uneducated when it comes to the Beach Boy community, but we don't want to be with a guest. We want to be respectful of their story and make sure we're saying it properly.
Yeah.
So we ask for like a biography. And then typically this is where it becomes situational, but with like Fred and some folks, we'll actually send them kind of a list of, hey, here are the questions that we'd like to ask. Please like X some of these out if you don't want us to ask them. And I don't think we've ever had anybody X anything out, but I think that brings a level of comfort that like, hey, these dudes aren't going to like ask me about, something stupid that is not Beach Boy related.
Yeah.
It is more political, that maybe they don't want to talk about. Like we've had guests say they didn't want to talk about like the Manson stuff,
Of course,
cause that was tough, and so it's like just being respectful and making sure they're comfortable. But that's kind of our process. But I think we do put a good amount of energy and time into making sure we're sorry, I'm talking a lot, but like with Rob Bonfiglio, he came on, and one thing I knew I really wanted to do was listen to his records, because yeah, he's great with the Beach Boys, and he's played with both groups, and he's played with Carney and Wilson Phillips and that kind of thing, but he's an awesome songwriter. And obviously with band Wanderlust, right? Is that the group, right?
Yeah. Yep.
He's got a ton of records, and so I wanted to make sure that like at least I'd listen to each one of them and could give some feedback, because I know that's a big part of his deal. And on the benefit to me from that is not just we're prepared, but I also found some music that's awesome that I really like,
Yeah, and we always make sure to ask our guests, how their journey started, and not with the Beach Boys, but just in general,
Right.
And I think that helps our guests at ease, because we really do care about them. We're not just on there because they're Beach Boy related.
Course,
and like Rob Bonfiglio is a great example of that, Carly Munoz, these musicians who played with the Beach Boys, but had, careers on their own. I would say that Greg and I do a lot of, we do prep for the interviews where we decide what questions we'll ask and who's going to ask which one. And we don't always, we don't really have a script. We just have kind of a general outline. And then, like a good example was our last interview when Rob Bonfiglio would say some things, Greg would say, oh, well, let me ask you about this, and some of those questions grow organically, but we haven't had very many of our guests that say, I want to know what you're going to ask me beforehand. And I think part of that is because we've done enough shows now where I think some of the folks we have on might check out an interview that we did before, and they kind of see where we go with it. I think they know that,
we have had guests say, hey, can you send me like what the show's like and that kind of thing. And I think that's worked to our benefit in a lot of situations, because they know we're not like, once again, we're not political. We want to talk about the band and their life. So
that's definitely a good thing in the sense of, having that happen where you talk to them about stuff, but then you also send stuff and they realize, shit, these people are, know what they're talking about. And, it's not where I'm walking into a situation where it's like, well, what's your favorite album and this and all this stuff where it's the basic stuff.
That's our first question. Yeah.
Well, no, and that aspect where you're asking, except for not talking about Pet Sounds, but I think in the sense of there's a lot out there. And I remember when I had Bobby on, and there are interviews with him. And as you mentioned, sometimes some of these people don't have always the platform to do stuff, but Bobby had a few interviews, and it's a lot of stuff that you'd hear him do if he was doing an interview for NBC or Fox, or it is, where it's like, I want to learn from this and not ask him the same baseline questions, but also see where I can improve. And that definitely makes the guest feel better. I can definitely tell, someone like Rob or Gary definitely seemed like they were enjoying it and calm, cool, and they weren't uncomfortable or nervous about it because they know that you're in an environment where they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think we were it's funny, Nolan, talking through this, it's like I think we were probably most nervous for so far in the show. Matt, I don't know if you were nervous, but like I remember I watched a ton of his interviews like that he did, so I made sure because he was super intimidating, was David Leaf, and
I'm sure.
Like I was so intimidated to talk to that guy. One, he's so intelligent, but he's such a legend for the Beach Boys.
I agree.
Big part of Brian Wilson's smile. I was just scared out of my mind to talk to him and not sound like an idiot.
I agree. And he was one of the more rare interviews that we do where he's been interviewed quite a bit and he's a bigger name. And it's kind of like, what do you ask him, you know, and that kind of thing. And that was a little intimidating, but he said he had a great time on the show and he said he wanted to make it a yearly thing with us, which is, we're honored about that. But, and that's always the thing Greg and I do when we talk about the questions, is that when we go through what we're going to ask, we do make a point to say that. What is, like you were kind of saying, Nolan, what's a question that fans might want to hear that they may not already know, right? It's not, get on and then ask people what they think about, pet sounds or something, or something like that, the obvious stuff. And so that's why I think having these guests who may not be as well known to the general public is really neat for us. It's a learning experience and our favorite. I've learned so many things about the Beach Boys I didn't know before, just from our chat and from our guests. So
how much of that David Beard, I want to ask one quick question, then move on to another set of stuff. In that situation, you bring a good point. He's one of the more interviewed people from a standpoint. Is it intimidating in the sense of making sure what you're saying is authentic and the correct stuff, or else he's gonna own you on that and he's gonna call you out?
No, because I don't know that there has not been one guest that's given me the vibe that they were going to treat us kind of poorly. You know what I mean? Treat you like you're not. Everyone has been so kind and really humble, and that's been a real treat. And I didn't get the vibe from David that he would be anything other than super kind and humble. It's more along the lines of, maybe it's just something you think of yourself, but I just do not want to look like an idiot around that guy, because he would be so nice about it. And I think it would hurt worse if you for some reason said something that was way wrong about his career. And I think it's more like with band members, I guess I'm a little bit more comfortable because, Matt and I are both musicians. We come from a musician background. So at least there's some like experiential overlap there. But David Leaf is like a writer. He's a historian. And that's just something it's a world I don't know very well. And so I think that adds to it too, of just really making sure that you're on and as much as you possibly can before.
Yeah. Just we were just nervous about the quality, right? Because, like Greg said, David Leaf, would never be, mean or anything, but he's been interviewed by Charlie Rose, and people like that, and then he comes on our show, so Greg and I are already intimidated that a guy like
Charlie
that's
Rose,
on our
one
show.
of the greatest interviews of all time.
So
right?
it was, so like he said, it's more an issue with us than the guest. But again, we just stick to, hey, we really want to talk to him about this stuff. We're genuinely fans of him, and we ask our questions, and I thought it worked out pretty well. So
I want to switch briefly from the show to more of your both relationships with the music and sort of the band, which is the more meat and potatoes of the whole thing. I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, which I always want to make very clear. I remember, I can't remember if it was the first episode. There have been a lot of episodes, so some of the information I try to remember isn't always as clear. But in any case, and I asked this to Bobby the other night when I had him on, that a lot of people who are successful with stuff, they know, well, never mind, that's not having to do with this. The group, the music, you mentioned, I think it was early on, that you first got in with the music with it was I think it was the 30th anniversary box set and Smile, if I'm not mistaken, the first stuff, and then other stuff sort of stemming off from that. At that time, what was your relationship like with the music as a fan standpoint, but just in general of the group before you got into the music?
Matt, you go first, man. This is fun to talk about.
Well, I'm a little bit older than my brother, and I can say that when I was growing up, they still had like 60s radio stations, oldies 99 or whatever. And you'd hear the Beach Boys every now and then. And even when I was young, 9 or 10, when they came on the radio, they'd stick out. There was a sound about them, And I remember hearing Little Deuce Coupe. And when I grew up to be a man, Dance, 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 just a couple. I still remember like being in the car with my dad driving, and he wasn't a fan. So he was nice enough to leave it on for me. But that was it. It was kind of a surface level. I liked these songs. Like I said, their sound was different to me.
Yeah. And
then of course, around that same time, Kokomo came out, and, they were kind of famous again. And we talked about that on the show the other night. And then, I grew up with the high school. I didn't listen to them all that much. But then when I got into college, that's when my dad got that 30th anniversary box set. Or right before I went to college, I was in high school, and Greg was younger than me. And we just, listened to that. And that's when I started to realize, as I got a little bit older and, and started to have more time to listen, is that the Beach Boys weren't just, a top 40 radio. There's layers and layers of things. I started to read more about Brian Wilson, because I didn't know all that stuff about him that much when I was a kid. And then, which gave me an even deeper appreciation, because, you have this gentle soul, but this tormented guy who is putting all the stuff out in his music. And it just made me appreciate it so much more. And then, of course, my brother was the one who gave me all the smile stuff to listen to. And I remember listening to that, like, this is wild, like hearing, Cabin Essence and Barnyard and all that stuff. And I was like, what is going on? And but it didn't turn me off. I didn't say that's enough. It made me just dive in. And then I got all the twofers, and then, and then I kind of transferred all that to Greg as he got a little bit older. And we've it's really been probably, Greg, 20 something years that we've just been listening to the Beach Boys together now, so.
Yeah, Nolan, I'd be interested to hear your answer on this, man. But I know go ahead.
Oh, no, you go. I'll let you give your answer, then I'll.
No, well, I think for me it was, where it really started was when Matt and my dad brought home I remember the night they brought it home, because I tore into there was this really cool book with it, and it had some of the coolest pictures. I fell in love with Carl. I'm like, this dude is awesome. I love his guitar. And that entire box set was really, I just played the crap out of it. It was just really, really cool. And then in high school, I got crazy. I got really, oddly enough, really into like rare live stuff. Yeah. I got really, like, I was collecting with people in like Australia, like people all over the world. Just because I couldn't get enough of the early 60s live stuff. Yeah. I remember the first time I heard Michigan 66, it was before you were allowed to have it. And I remember sitting in the back of band class. Wow. And I was a drummer in band. So in concert band, you don't do anything. I mean, it's just, you just sit in the back. I had headphones on and a CD player. I was just playing it over and over again. And then I got into Smile stuff, like with Matt. And I want to ask you a question, Nolan, because I want to hear your answer. Yeah. I kind of wonder, and we should ask this on the show, Matt, but I wonder if everybody's Beach Boy experience is the same, where it's really compartmentalized, where it's like, I was really, like, at this point, I was really into the surf stuff. And then at this point in my life, I got really, for some reason, really into MIU. And then, you know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know. I wonder if there's a Beach Boy fan that just got it all, it was just like, I love everything. Because I tend to believe that I think we all probably compartmentalize it a little bit, where it's like, I really loved this at one time, and then it just grows from there, and you keep exploring and finding new things. But man, I'd love to hear your answer on that.
I think for me, and it's similar to both of yours, and I think that's true for a lot of people with musicians in terms of this size of group, and maybe in particular with the Beach Boys. For me, though, was, I had grown up, family always was watching American Idol, so pop stuff, a lot of pop music and all that current stuff that listens on. No, nothing against anyone that listens to that, but none of that's played in my car. But it's a lot of older stuff. But I growing up, I was into Kenny Rogers, Barry Manilow. Those two were probably the biggest when I was growing up. And really, that's awesome. As I got older, and I hold similar to Matt, that with Full House, and in the sense of I had reruns. Obviously, I wasn't born in the 90s when that was really going on, but I reruns, and the first 3 songs ever from the Beach Boys that I ever heard was there was an episode where they come on stage and they sang Barbara Ann and Kokomo. Those are the first two songs. And the third one was Dennis's hit song, Forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that I remember reading about him and stuff. And then that was fine. That was the three songs I'd listened to. And then I think a few years ago when I was a freshman in college and I was a senior, and I was listening to the music and I really was getting more into it. And the LA Light album and Dennis's album I'd gotten within the last year and a half, 2 years for Christmas. And then it was just really getting in deep into stuff. And there was stuff that I think in other bands, I think with something like the Rolling Stones, or I think the Beatles, in the sense where you listen to a lot of their bassline stuff and that's sort of it. And a lot of people know that, but I don't think you could ask a lot of people some of their stuff from the 90s that they didn't use to the album, such as I think what's the song? I gotta find it.
Which group? Nolan?
The Beach Boys. It was where was it? Brian had it on one of his. Where is it? Come on. It was.
Dude, how awesome is it that you immediately took to the Light album? That's pretty good.
You're ahead of us. You're ahead of me.
Ahead of me
at your age. Yeah, I mean, Light album for me was like during the show. I'm not gonna lie. So
there
the
was
Beach Boys stuff.
how did you get there? I mean, because
it wasn't the first one. The first one I got was obviously Pet Sounds, and then I had gotten this was a few years ago. Pet Sounds, or within the last 2 years, Pet Sounds, and surprisingly 15 Big Ones, which isn't it doesn't have a whole lot of there's a lot of stuff on it that isn't my favorite, but there's a few Dennis songs on there that he had covered, and then I think it just progressed, and then Surf's Up, and then Dennis's album, and then LA Light album. And that just, there's a lot of stuff on there. It's similar to 15 Big Ones. In my opinion, it wasn't there's a mix of stuff on there, but it was just such a powerful album. I found the song was where is it? Soul Searching. I don't think a lot of people know of.
Soul Searching. Sings that great, yeah.
And which a song from the 90s that was supposed to be on an album they were going to put together. But I don't think a lot of people know that, which speaks the volume of the Beach Boys, because a lot of other groups, everyone knows so many bass songs of them that sound similar, whereas the Beach Boys, there's so many different songs with different moods and vibes to it that people don't really know.
Yeah, it's so true.
You're correct about that. Greg and I talk about that sometimes. We're going to do next week, we're going to talk about the Friends album, but the Friends album is so different than Pet Sounds. Yeah. It's so different than All Summer Long or Today, and then Smiley Smiles out there. The Beach Boys have they're almost like a genre in themselves, and they do so many different things, because they've had, after Brian kind of took a step back, you had other songwriters as well, and so their sounds a little bit different. So they're very fascinating that way to have.
Like each album is a completely different band. I don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
And I mean, early on, I don't know that I would say that for maybe like Surfer Girl and Little Do Scoop. Like they're pretty clearly the same group there, but once they start to really hit their stride, I would say from like Shutdown Volume 2 maybe All Summer Long on. It's like a different, Today sounds very different from Summer Days and sounds very different. I mean, there's obviously some hangover. So you must be a Dennis guy. So you're really into Dennis.
I love Dennis. I love his album. I think, which is the reason why I love LA Light album, because the songs on there, Love Surround Me, Angel Come Home.
Oh my gosh.
But then also
Baby Blue, right?
I love Baby Blue, yeah.
But on that album for me, it's one of my favorites, which I play all the time now, is Good Time, that Carl had sang song, I should say, proper English. And there's a concert where I go back to often. I have on this YouTube playlist that songs I like that they necessarily haven't released. Where it's a 4th of July concert. I think it was 85 maybe 1980. I think it was, and Carl and Brian are saying back and back with each other on the song, and I just sit back and listen to it, let it take in. It was similar to what Bobby had said, where there's just so much variety to it that you don't know. And similar to Friends or another album, Holland, or an album like that, where you could go to a normal person, regardless if they're an age group of the 60s or in the 60s that grew up with, they might not know what it is. I could ask some of my class, what's a song by the Beach Boys? And they could say Kokomo, because that's a popular song, but they don't know the true depths of it. So it's definitely an amazing thing. And to be able to know this much about the group, such as yourselves, and discuss it in depth is something that I go to my father when I took him to Brian Wilson in October. And the whole car ride, there was about 2.5 hour car ride, and nonstop me sharing everything I knew about the group and everything about them and this about that and what happened at this point in this decade. And there's just so much that's so appreciative. But it wasn't until the last few years where I really got into it, where I was finding songs, where I had where I listened to the Made in California CD on Spotify and was listening to the live versions. I think one of my favorites off there is the live version of Sail On Sailor from I think it was like 95 or whatever. And Carl at that time, was having some health issues, but he could still belt it out. But I want to sort of go back to the 30th box set for you guys. At that point, they had or not at that point, because they had the last one they stopped before 2012 was actual album. I'm not going to say Stars and Stripes is an actual album, but what Summer in Paradise, which in itself is another album that isn't usually the most favorited, although there's stuff on there that's talented. But from 85, when they had released their self-titled album, which is another one I love nowadays, from 85 to 96, I guess, the Stars and Stripes, how do you both assess that period of material from a fan's perspective?
Are we including 85 on there or no?
Yeah, from the 85 album to, I guess, Stars and Stripes, if you want to count that as an album as well.
Well, I think so. Nolan, this is where my brother is gonna be able to answer this much better than I can, but this is where like the knowledge comes into play. I actually don't know the order of records. So 85 was the next one, Still Cruising then?
85, yeah.
85 and then Still Cruising and then Stars and Stripes.
Well,
Summer in
Paradise.
Summer in Paradise and then Stars and Stripes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about what, those 4 albums then?
Yeah.
I think 85 is awesome. 85 It's Getting Late.
Yes.
Right. Good timing? No, not Good Timing. What's the other
Get
one?
Your Back's on there.
Get Your Back.
There's a song on there with Stevie Wonder that Carl sings, I Still Love You.
Right. That's right.
Is it called Right Where I Belong? Is that the one?
No.
Where I Belong.
No, yeah.
No, Where I Belong. Is that on 85?
That's on 85. That's Robert White
That's
Johnson.
Robert White. We had him on the show too.
Yeah.
He did Passing Friends, another really cool tune. I think we were just talking about it the other day, Nolan. It's really too bad because I think a lot of the a lot of the records around the Kokomo era, especially like the mid to late 80s and then on, I think all kind of get lumped in with this like really weird, awkward, nostalgic, like kind of like, what are you guys doing? And like and I think it all goes back to the visual of it, because the Beach Boys, for better or for worse, I think later on in their careers, they took the road of kind of selling out isn't the right word, but I mean, when you're coming out of a Woody on top of a surfboard with a bunch of girls in bikinis and you're like
50,
and you're like, well, and you're doing like Wipeout with like rap and stuff. It's a little cringy.
It's almost in the sense, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's almost when you're down by 20 in a basketball game and you decide to not try to come back and just say, we're going to let them continue to score, at least in my opinion.
I just think they all get lumped in with that, and I think some of the good music is missing.
I think I do like, again, the 85 album is another album I've come to love more because of our show. But I think what happened was, we talked about this on our last show, how Kokomo was an essential song.
Yeah.
But I also think in a way it was a curse, because kind of like what Greg was saying, they became popular again, but they became popular, like the Full House Beach Boys, you know what I mean? And so there was some good to that, but there was some negative. And what happened was Brian Wilson was ready to get back with the band, and he wrote all this beautiful music with Andy Paley, which I've talked about on our show. Some of it's been released now, but some of it, you can hear a lot of it on YouTube now, unofficial. But they ended up scrapping the album. That was when you're talking about Soul Searching. That was going to be on this 95 album. And instead of doing that, they ended up doing Stars and Stripes, which again was all the car songs and surfing songs with country singers. And was it a bigger seller? Maybe. But, I think it was just always something since the 60s they had. Do we want to move forward, musically, progressively, or do we want to stick to the formula? And again, Greg and I don't get political about it, but I think that's pretty much what happened then. But by the time they're in the 80s and they're already a band, and they've already been a band for a long time, I don't think there was that push to, we got to be different. We got to be the greatest, And so I think they became more of a touring band between that time, if you know what I mean. And could sell out concert halls and just play their hits, you know?
I think, to be fair, probably should say that, like, I think the Beach Boys persona around that time, some people may be into that, and that's totally cool. Like, you may like, that may be your thing. Like, you may like the over the top surfboards and like, you know, the kick line and cheerleaders. Exactly. The Full House thing. Matt loves Full House, right? That may be your thing. For me, I wasn't into it, but I still think the music gets left out, and because some of those songs on those records are 85 is awesome. It's got some really Still Cruising, In My Car, you know,
Somewhere Near Japan,
just like really great pop music.
Make It Big, man. We talk about that one a lot on the show.
A lot of fans probably throw out because of the whole, like, you know, cheerleader thing.
Yeah, which is something that's hard to compartmentalize, but also accept. But you also never want to, you know, push that against anyone who does that, because, you know, you always hear stuff about when people ask members ask questions and they get defensive or what have it be. But like you said, there's a lot of good stuff, and it's unfortunate because, and David Beard had mentioned it on a show where he said the Still Cruising album, there's original material on there, but there's also covers on there or stuff from movies when they had all that other material from that period, Problem Child and songs like that, where they could have put it together, but then they decide to do half and half because they're sort of split. But it's, and in a sense, it's also similar to the Summer in Paradise, although there's a lot of stuff on there that's not the most comparable in terms of other albums they've released. But their songs, Lahaina Hawaii is a song on there that's very powerful, and David had put one of those lines in his recent edition of ESQ. But it's unfortunate, but then again, it's a marvel to look at because you have a lot of groups like them who start at the same time but aren't around anymore, or ended because they split up or whatever. And now you have a group who split between the middle, probably won't get back together again, although I'd love to see them do it for the 60th anniversary, which who knows what's going to happen there. I'll never know until it happens. But there's so much tension and pull with it when it doesn't happen with another group. There's a group in particular, the Spinners, which is a group from the 60s, a disco or R&B type of group. And I think there's one living member left in that group, but they're still going on. I think another group, the Shy Lights, from that same period, there's one living member left in it. And you never hear any sort of disagreement with it in the sense of that there's only one founding member left in the group, unlike the Beach Boys, where Mike's still pushing through. And you have to admit that. I mean, regardless of what you want to think of certain things that have happened, it's sort of like you have to admit it.
Yeah, no, it's a really good, man. I feel like we're talking like just like on a phone call. This is like what my brother Matt, and this is what our phone calls are like. You know, it's really interesting is when you go, like when you look historically at rock and roll, it's still a very young thing. Like it was a very, I mean, what, like the 40, like late 40 or 50s, you know, you start to get rock and roll. I think you have to step back and realize that what the Beach Boys have done over the past 60 years is unprecedented. And I mean, what other, like, they didn't have another group. Like if Matt and I were to start a band today, we have a ton of bands that we could model ourselves off of and look at how they took their journey and kind of make our own. The Beach Boys have been trailblazers the entire time. Yeah. Like when you think about, like, we judge them on like Holland, going from Holland to 15 Big Ones. And like, why didn't you just keep creating like Holland?
Exactly. Yeah.
But they were assuming that they were done every time. You know what I mean? They weren't like, no one told them that, hey, you're going to be around for the next 50 years. Exactly, so you can keep, as far as they were concerned at that time. And I'm sure a couple times in the late 60s, they thought, I remember reading that Carl, like they couldn't even fill like places with like 100 people, you know? So they thought it was all over. And most bands at that time, it was kind of like basically one and done. Like if you look at all the bands from that era, like which ones actually survived into 70s, 80s, 90s, and actually had success? But like the Bee Gees, maybe. Yeah. I mean, the Beatles were done in the 70 and the Stones. But other than that, like who else was still around making relevant music? So I think whatever misgivings or whatever, you know, comments, criticisms you have about the group, I think it's always important to step back and say, hey, these guys, you can judge them on the decisions they've made, but you know, it's tough to criticize when they were trailblazing the entire time. Even today, like every decision they make, no one else has done it before. So it's tough to judge them on it.
The productivity of Brian Wilson, you know, in the beginning, in those years, all the way up to Pet Sounds, just that in itself is really incredible. I know it's all the Beach Boys, but you know, the writing, the producing, and everything, you know, surely that couldn't go on forever, you know. And it's kind of like Greg said, Brian just decided to take a step back. He got tired, you know, and it allowed the other Beach Boys to make music too, which is why it's really neat to listen to them in that era. Everything is so different. I mean, you get something new with them all the time. And I think it's great. Yeah.
I want to ask a sort of a hypothetical, or the next few questions are hypothetical that I'm curious about, and I often think about. And I think when I really started getting to the Beach Boys, I'd always be thinking about them and make sure, you know, I'm saying what I truly feel, and not based off what someone says on Facebook or whatever, which is definitely the home to get all your information. When the band broke up, the band obviously broke up in '98 with their various groups going different ways. But I'm curious on your guys' perspective. If they had, let's say they hadn't split up and Carl and Dennis are both alive, would both of them either have stayed with the Beach Boys if they're both alive, or gone with Brian, or just one brother gone with Brian, the other done their own thing?
Well, I don't think it would have happened, because some of the stuff I've read is that what happened in '98 when Carl passed, you know, Mike wanted to keep going, and Al didn't think it was right to go on without Carl because he was their musical leader, and Al kind of stepped back.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. So I think that if Carl hadn't passed at that time, or Dennis, they may have, you know, retired or broken up for other reasons, but I don't think it would have been in 1998. I think the big reason for the split in '98 was the death of Carl, because Brian wasn't, you know, touring with the band then anyway. You know, he did that a few years later, and then eventually Al came with him. Remember, Al didn't start touring with Brian till after, you know, the 50th anniversary, way later. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of how I look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. I also, I tend to think that after, like, when was the last like album that Brian was super hyper involved in? Maybe like Friends, that kind of era. I think after that point, Brian was kind of on his own parallel kind of thing, right? He was there whenever they wanted him, but also he was doing his own thing.
Yeah.
So I tend to think that Matt is 100% right. I think that if Carl were still alive, I think they still would be touring as the Beach Boys, just like they had been in '96 or '97. Yeah. But I do think that Brian probably would be doing his own thing. Yeah. For some reason, I just have that feeling that Brian,
he always has, you know.
Yeah, I think he probably would have joined them on stage a couple times. Yeah, but I think he probably would still have his own group. I think he probably would still be putting out his own records. And
I mean, sometimes we forget too, or not forget, but remember that even in the early '60s, before he officially stopped touring, he didn't like to tour. You know, there were times where David Marks and Al Jardine played and Brian didn't go. That was never his thing, was never to go out with a touring band. Greg and I have talked about this on the show. It's almost like there's two bands sometimes, the touring band and then the studio, you know, entity that is the Beach Boys, you know. And so that, I think that might have happened. They might have put out a few more albums. You never know. I mean, you never know. That would have been cool, but without Carl's voice, it's hard to put out, you know, new Beach Boy albums, you know.
Yeah. How do you guys assess, and I don't know if you ever will talk about on your show, depending on, you know, how much of a pull it would have in terms of discourse, but during that time, you know, like you said, Al went his way and Brian went his way, and the Mike and Bruce carried on. But during that time, it was, you know, an interesting time for Al in the sense of he sort of had to find his identity again, because Brian is as large as he is, no pun intended, in terms of musically, but also Mike and Bruce with the Beach Boys, and Al has to figure out his way. And during that process, Matt is still touring with the Beach Boys in '98. How do you, as a fan, how do you go about that sort of time period for that type of music in the band?
You mean as far as being like a fan of the Beach Boys?
Well, I think at that point, when Al was stepping away and his son was still involved with the group, as Al was stepping away, how do you, as a fan, how do you assess one of those more interesting moments of the group?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I guess to be honest, Nolan, I think once Carl passed away, and I was 11 when Carl passed away, and even then it hit me really hard because, like I said, I was in love with Carl. I still am to this day. His spirit, everything about him, I super dig. But I kind of, once Carl passed away, I don't know if you felt this, Matt, but I was kind of done with the beach, not done with the Beach Boys, but I was kind of like, I was ready to become a fan that is more step back and let's look at all the old stuff and let's have, like, it's almost like I was more, it was more like, okay, Capitol, what can you release? What can we put together? Because to me, okay, here's a really good way to put it. Nolan, have you ever watched The Office, the show?
Yes.
Okay. So the way this is the best way I can possibly put it. When Carl passed away, to me, it was like Steve Carell leaving the show. I get that the show's still going for 2 more seasons. That's great. I love some of the characters. They're awesome. But to me personally, I'm not saying this is fact. I'm just saying, for me, my opinion, Carl was the Beach Boys. He was, to me personally, since I was a kid, he was a big part of the Beach Boys. So when Carl passed away and they all did their kind of thing, I kind of stopped watching The Office. I stopped watching the show, not because not for any other reason, except my favorite character was no longer
very true
on stage anymore, So that was me. I was more like, hey, I want to get into more of the stuff that they're releasing that isn't necessarily anything to do with the touring band.
Yeah, I can't add much to that. And again, this is not a political thing with Mike Love, but 98 on, it became Mike Love's band, and some people like that, but the song selection changed a little bit. And even with the songs that Carl sang, it was somebody else that wasn't Carl.
Yeah.
So I was kind of the same way. I didn't really pay attention to them that much as far as their touring and stuff then. So if Matt Jardine was in the band and Al wasn't, I wouldn't have even known it at the time. I'm more like Greg at that point. Let's start from the beginning and, enjoy those, those beautiful harmonies and stuff, and just forget about it kind of. So. Yeah.
Now the last year or so they've been in the news, whether it's the box set release or the potential for a 60th anniversary. Who knows what's going to happen there. And certainly the part of them being sold to Irving Azoff and his group to sort of keep them going. They had performed before the 50th anniversary at the Grammys as sort of this is what we're going to do. It's not a secret, but this is going to lead to this. In terms of the 60th, and people like ourselves who are on the outside of that so-called inner circle that know what's going on, what do you hope happens? And would you like to see a small tour or just a Grammy sort of appearance where they sing a few songs and that's it?
I think this is where Matt and I are different. I'll let Matt answer. I think my answer is, I think anytime you can get a chance to see the actual Beach Boys in person, I think it's a cool thing. So I would love to see them tour again. I think it'd be great. But I think Matt has a different answer to that. Don't you, Matt?
Yeah, I would. If they got, well, first of all, Greg and I saw the 50th together and it was a great experience. Cool. They played like 50 songs. I mean, it was awesome. But you have to remember it's 10 years later now. Yeah. And so I just don't think they can do a big tour like that. If they came near me, I would go see them. But what I would really like to see is more of something where the Beach Boys come and, they're all sitting together in the audience and they're honored for the music and everything they gave to the music world with other bands and maybe testimonies and things like that, just so they can kind of take it in. Like, this is the effect you've had on, popular music and all that. I would like to see something like that, actually, more of like a retrospective of their career with them present, I
have to agree with you, Matt, in that sense, although I would love to see him play.
Yeah.
And I think what separates, and it's nothing to blow up smoke up anyone's rear end in this in terms of members who are still alive, but you see, Mike and Bruce, and they definitely put on a great show. I'm sure I haven't seen them. That's nothing because it's not like I like one group more than the other, but I haven't seen them. But they put on a great show, I'm sure, and they're still lively, energetic. And then you go see Brian, who reads off a teleprompter and sort of relies more on the others in his group to sing for him and sort of help him, get through the show. And nothing against that. He's brave and the thing he's gone through that diehards know about. But I don't know if I could see a whole concert tour, a whole tour across the world. I definitely wouldn't want that because that's a lot of energy. And I know that Brian tours way less than Mike and he's happy with that. What I would like to see is them, maybe it's just a few nights, whatever it may be, a thing like the Beatles documentary. There's parts of it in the sense of not another documentary. There's plenty of them out there that share the story, but where they have concerts that they record, but then they have members who have played with them in the group come back and play with them. Because I don't know what it was for the 50th anniversary. I know Wikipedia says that Bobby was part of it. Whether that's true or not, that's another situation. But to see all the guys who are still alive that played with them, to be on there and play with them would be an interesting thing. I don't know if I want another album. I know that there's, the narrative out there of what happened with the 50th anniversary and how it was cut short and what happened back behind the scenes with the album. But I think that there definitely needs to be something that shows. Hopefully Irving Azoff and the stuff he has does something for them.
Yeah, wouldn't it be cool if like the Beach Boys got together and did like a lo-fi album? Like Johnny Cash did some cool stuff before he passed away that was just super like authentic and raw, Like how cool would that be if they did like a lo-fi thing where it's not produced, it's just them, no voice, no vocal doubling, no auto tune, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you about that, Greg. If it was something like that, I like the music on the That's Why God Made the Radio album, but it is very auto-tuned and kind of, produced where it's hard to tell who was who sometimes. Did you ever see the Radio City Music Hall tribute to Brian Wilson that David Leaf produced?
I haven't seen the whole thing, but I've seen the parts that are available on YouTube.
Yeah. That's kind of what I envisioned for the 60th, something like that, except all the Beach Boys are there. And then maybe at the end they get up there. And, like you said, they could have band members perform tributes for him throughout the concert, and then they all get together at the end. I think that would be a cool idea.
What I also would like, and I know Queen has done this. I don't know when it was, but they had done Brian May had played the guitar in one song, and he dedicated it to the member that they lost. Why am I forgetting his name?
Not Freddie Mercury. Right?
Yeah, Freddie Mercury. And, and it was pointing up into the screen, and Freddie was there, his ghost or whatever was there. And I know Nat King Cole's daughter had done that when she had sung a song, Unforgettable, and they had done it together. And he was on her father was on the screen, and she's singing part of it, and vice versa. Hopefully it'd be cool. It'd cost a lot of money to see Dennis and Carl come on if they were singing Surfer Girl, and they're, I don't know, some sort of Michael Jackson type thing where it's some hallucination,
like a hologram or something.
Hologram type of thing. But
no,
they did.
That's an awesome idea.
That is, at the 50th anniversary, they didn't have a hologram, but they all played live to like, they had in the back Carl singing God Only Knows, and the band was live. And then they did Forever with Dennis, and they showed that video of him at Central Park singing it, and they played live to that, which was pretty cool.
Really and that I'm sure was definitely a tough moment for Brian to deal with, because obviously that conversation about his brothers, and it was evident in the documentary of him when they're driving past Carl's house and he doesn't want to go see it, and he tears up a little bit, which definitely was a heart-wrenching moment. And I'm sure he wants nothing to do with that conversation in terms of the 60th, because it's something that he still doesn't want to touch, even if it's 30 years later. I want to talk about the box set in a little bit, but I want to go back to the show for a quick second. You had alluded to it with MIU and stuff like that. When you're putting the show together for both of you, how much time do you put forth in terms of what you want to talk about, also what you want people to learn about, and also see if people are going to get all worked up about it or whatnot?
That's a good question. So the way we kind of truncate the show or like partition it out or whatever is we try and do like 3 different types of shows.
Yeah.
So one show is typically a guest, and that takes up a pretty big part of the show. Another type of show is like what we're doing this next week is it's like an album breakdown.
Yeah.
And that takes up most of the show. And then the third one is what we call kind of our normal show. And this is where we have a really big, like overarching theme. For example, Matt and Greg go surfing. So our whole thing is just, let's talk about the surf music. It's not necessarily a specific album or a person, but we're talking about kind of a theme. So that's how we break down the shows. And then within each show, Matt and I are constantly, and we spent some time over the break. It's really one reason why we wanted a break, because it's tough to work on a product while you're doing it every week. We kind of wanted to step back and really sharpen the blade and focus on creating better content. and you can kind of see it, but within each show, there are segments that we do. And one of them, the Many Moods of Matt, where Matt gives some sort of top, kind of thing. Or, the news segment, or the all request, or we do bingo or trivia, stuff like that. And we're constantly trying to throw things at the wall to see what works and what doesn't work a lot of times. But to answer your question in full, circling back, for example, when we do Many Moods of Matt, we'll typically do a call. We'll do a call like right after the previous show, right after like we just did a show. We'll get on a call and we'll talk about what we want to do next week. And then Matt will run me through a little bit what he's thinking on the Many Moods. And usually there's a few different things. And I always urge Matt. I think Matt's probably a little bit more hesitant, but I always like doing things that are more controversial because like it at the end of the day, we want people to chat and have fun with it. And you can't say stuff that ultimately people aren't going to want to chat about things everybody agrees upon, When Matt talks about how Kokomo is underrated and a masterpiece and is up there with Pet Sounds, I think that's gonna get people a little riled up. But it's more about, it's not really about whether Matt's right or wrong. It's more about, let's just have fun and have a fun conversation. It's similar to it's like bar conversation.
Of course,
when you're sitting and drinking with people, a good conversation is like, hey, what sport could you fake play for the longest without anybody noticing you're not a real NBA player, baseball, like whatever it is, just like fun drinking games kind of thing.
Of course,
and the more provocative, the more thought provoking, I think the better for sure.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons we love doing the albums. To give Greg a lot of credit, he will learn every song on the album and, he'll play it live and then we'll talk about it poorly, after.
But
we rate the songs, and that's always fun in the chat because Greg and I don't agree on what song is a 10 and what's a 5. But the other neat thing about
I forgot we did that. I just reminded me. That's really fun.
But the other thing that I like about it, and I think the people that watch our show appreciate, is that we're going into this album, we're spending 2 hours on it. And for a lot of people, we get comments sometimes, I'm going to go back and revisit this album. I didn't think about it this way, or maybe I hadn't heard it. And for me, just as a fan, I love going back and having to listen again, and I listen a little bit more intently now. If I know I have to speak about it, I can't just say every time, oh, I love the song, it's awesome. You have to say something with more substance. And so that's one of the things when you ask us, what do we decide to do? And what if, the people that watch our show, like, I think the albums they always like, because there's always songs on an album somebody likes. There's always some that are divisive, that some people like and some people don't like. So it naturally brings a lot of discussion when we do the albums,
Yeah.
Like, hey, little tomboy, would be a good one,
Well, the light album, to be honest, Nolan, I don't think I'd ever listened to it besides like the big one on there, the good time.
Yeah.
Like I'd never listened to any of those songs before the show. And we're talking like a year ago. I've been a Beach Boy fan my entire life, you know, and that just shows you that, once again, we're not experts. It's just, the people in the chat were like, dude, Greg, you need to listen to the light album, Baby Blue. And I started listening to them, like, holy crap, this stuff is just as good as any other Beach Boys stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Which is unfortunate because I meant to ask it to Bobby, but I didn't want to, get too personal or have him get all worked up and shed tears on the show, which I'm sure he didn't want to do. But that in this situation, that album, how great it is in a sense of, Sunflower, which is another great album, amazing album, not on the same level, but both albums have great stuff on it, but they didn't do well commercially necessarily. And it's a hard thing to see a band put forth all that energy into an album that's great, and then they can't do well. And they have other groups at the time who release stuff that might not necessarily be as good, but they release other stuff, which then causes, tension. I want to speak about the box set, although it's not super recent that they released it, but it released and it took a long time. And I know Al had mentioned stuff through interviews he had done, whether it was supposed to come out or not. But seeing that and looking at it, and you see there's a lot of stuff on there that Dennis had written that was supposed to go on a certain solo album he was supposed to do with another touring member. How much of that do you think, I don't want to say saves his image, but or gives him more credibility as a performer, especially when his solo album Pacific Ocean Blue didn't really do as well until it was re-released early on in 2000s.
Yeah, I'm gonna be really blunt with you here, Nolan, and I don't want to hurt your feelings here. And this is where Beach Boys talk is it gets a lot of fun. I have never been a huge fan of Dennis musically.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna upset a lot of people because a lot of people really like. I thought to me the Field Flows box confirmed what I had thought, which is Dennis was a prolific writer, but not necessarily a super focused or like I think the stuff that's good of Dennis is the stuff that's about as good as it could possibly get. Pacific Ocean Blue, I mean, I've got it sitting right here. Like, I think it's a cool record.
Yeah.
In that it's Dennis, and Dennis passed away, and it was what he was working on, and he was kind of this. Okay, so I mean, I love talking about this stuff. So you talked about the Beach Boys from the 80s on, right? We were having that conversation. I think those two things are exact mirrors of each other. What I mean is, I think the Beach Boys visually and like the persona of the Beach Boys at the time, like kind of lame, right?
Yeah.
But the music from that time is super cool.
Exactly.
With Dennis, I think a lot of his stuff gets a pass because of the visual, because he's the drummer, because he was this dark, mysterious character that was crazy, super good looking, charismatic. But the music was like, like if you look, that's what I think. I think Dennis is kind of overrated.
No, I can understand
musically, but I mean, I still think he's obviously super talented. But
yeah,
that's all I got from the box.
I understand that. I understand that completely.
Yeah, Matt. Okay, Matt loves Dennis.
No, well, I had a similar feeling. I won't go as far as to say everything Greg said, but with in particular the box set. I believe that the music that's on the records, the official records on the 70s with Dennis, that's his best. That's his best stuff.
Light album, like that's gotta be the best stuff. It's
mean, Cuddle Up on Carl and the Passions is a great tune. His songs on Sunflower are brilliant. They are. And I know that he was supposed to have a couple songs on the Surf's Up album, and then they didn't get out there because of some stuff in the band. And I know he wrote some other, I'm not saying that everything that wasn't released of him, there's not some good tracks. In fact, I posted one months ago called It's a New Day, and he sings it with Blondie. And I like that one a lot. That was on the box set.
Oh, that is a good one.
But I do think with Dennis, he had some really good moments, but I think all his best moments are out there already on the official recordings. And I think Greg made a good point. And I read this recently that Dennis was a really good songwriter. He was a musician, but he wasn't disciplined enough to know when to end a song or know when enough was enough, like on a production. And again, I'm not saying this is what I read, where he would listen to it and then just layer so much stuff on it that it almost becomes too much, and some people like that. And to me, it's just a matter of taste, and I could be biased a little bit, because the other thing I would say about Dennis is, and Greg and I have talked about this, is that he and Carl had a disadvantage in a way, because they had to come out of that shadow of Brian for so long. Yeah. They just followed what Brian did, and they said, yeah, okay, this is great, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden they had this pressure to have to write songs because Brian wasn't doing it anymore. So I think a little bit they get maligned. I don't want to say maligned, but it's a little bit like that, is that Dennis was kind of a new songwriter, the Friends era, right? The 2020 era. He wasn't writing songs for, 8 years at that point, like Brian or whatever. And I think that shows, though,
Yeah. That's such a good point. I think people forget that Brian had like 4 or 8 albums to practice before he actually really started getting into the heavy hitter stuff.
Like Pet Sounds, he had so much.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, even Shutdown Volume 2, there were 4 albums worth of music, 5 albums worth of music before that, where he could kind of, Surf and Safari, what's Cuckoo Clock? Is that really a great tune? They've wait, am I saying that song right?
That's right. It's on there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that's not great, but it gets a pass because, his later stuff was great. I think if Carl and Dennis had that same track, where they were given a few albums to kind of grow and get better. Can you imagine what their Pet Sounds would have been, or what their, but Dennis died so young, and Carl, I think Carl, unfortunately, had to take over so much of the live show responsibilities. I don't know that he ever had the opportunity to spend a lot of time on that kind of stuff. So,
and I think also, and I think, and it's unfortunate. And when you had the guitarist, but not Billy, but the other guy who you mentioned who had on the show, who was his guitarist, I'm sure he mentioned
John Daly,
about that experience and how fun it was. I know Billy had mentioned that one of his shows, what that was like. And that experience for him to first be able to release stuff that was his own material that he put together and he put his effort into, to not see it as on the same level commercially as other stuff that they'd released with the Beach Boys, I'm sure definitely took a beating on him, in the sense also with Dennis with Pacific Ocean Blue, to then come back and then they're sort of disheartened and, you know, like, okay, I'll just go on, and next thing you know, they're making an album that isn't as good as other stuff they've made because they're not in the right mood mentally. I'm curious.
Yeah,
it's the day-old, or it's the forever long argument. You talk about creativity and growing, and what if they had their pet songs would be like if they really had enough album experience. If they had that, do you think, at looking back at this point, seeing as the Rolling Stones are around the same period and the Beatles they had their documentary or 2 documentaries, do you think if they had grown and had everyone had that same experience in terms of the brothers, do you think they'd still have the same size that the other bands from that same time still playing today have?
Oh, the audiences, you mean?
Yeah, in terms of that, you see the Beatles, they have those 2 big documentaries that are success. You see the Rolling Stones, everyone's in their late 70s and they're selling out concerts every single time, and they're still not slowing down sort of big stadiums. But do you think if they grew, the 3 brothers at least, maybe the other ones as well, grew in terms of Brian's writing ability, they would still have longevity in terms of what the other groups have?
Yeah, you know, Greg, that's a very interesting question. Greg and I have talked a lot about that, you know, like why are the Beach Boys not like more highly rated, you know? And I don't know the answer to that, because again, I think in the 60s, Brian Wilson was the most prolific writer. You know, they didn't have number 1 hits all the time like the Beatles, but just because a song's number 1 doesn't mean it's better. You know, I think Britney Spears has more number 1 hits than the Beach Boys, you know?
Hey.
So there is that commercial aspect, but I feel like just in popular culture in general, that's what they look at. It's like Greg said, they look at the persona, you know, Mick Jagger's this bad guy, you know, the Beatles were a product in themselves. And I think the Beach Boys, just with Brian stepping back and then the Beach Boys not being popular in the late, you know, 60s, early 70s. And then they were known as a vocal group, right? But then they come out with 15 Big Ones and Love You, where the vocals are like, what happened to these guys? You know, they all sound like old smokers now, you know. It's hard to explain, but I just think maybe in a way, the fact that they released so many albums was a curse to them in a way, you know, to have over 30 something albums and probably about half of them not being very commercially viable, even though as fans, we think of it as like a treasure trove. I think if you're just an everyday average Beach Boys fan and you want to go to a show, you're not going to know, you know, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, or something off of Sunflower, for instance, you know? And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I just think commercially they were never as big just because of their image, but I think their music is leaps and bounds better than both those bands, but that's not what everybody's looking for all the time. You know?
Well, I think and that brings up a point. Not too many people, if they're the classic fan, are going to know. And it's because I think, you know, people not always giving more appreciation towards it, but the average fan in this sense, you know, they're not going to know Funky Pretty because they're going to want, you know, the classic car songs. They're going to know that, but they're not going to know this, which isn't necessarily the case with, I think, you know, the other bands. I think an example is a show, and the Beach Boys I don't think have had too many opportunities in the sense of, you see the Rolling Stones, they had a song Through and Through, I think it was on The Sopranos one episode. And then that, you know, the show was super big, so they're getting this whole nother audience, and then the Beach Boys are still confined to this sort of, the fans, a lot of people only know this certain material. I have another question for you, and it's another hypothetical. You know, they're not getting any younger. The core members, they're still alive, and we had mentioned that earlier, but the 60th, Mike's 80, Bruce and Brian are getting close to 80. I think they're both 79, and Alan and David are not too far behind them. God forbid anything happens, you know, to Mike. In your opinions, what happens to the group? Do you see Bruce taking over, or do you see it being like a group whose core members aren't physically there anymore and it sort of just becomes an entity like Elvis?
That'd be an interesting twist of fate.
Yeah.
Mike or Bruce fronting the Beach Boys, right?
Okay. And if that happens, do you see Brian or Al taking the name, or is it just becoming something like Elvis where it's just an entity now?
No, I think this is where you have an opportunity to give Mike Love just about as much credit as I think one could bestow upon another human being.
Yeah.
That dude, I think 100% the Beach Boys are over when Mike Love is over. I don't see I just don't see anybody else having the passion or the drive. That's probably not I don't want to insult any of the other members because Al and Brian and Bruce and Blondie, they're all fantastic, but Mike seems to me have a super focused drive specifically about the kind of the Beach Boy brand. And I don't get that so much from Al. I don't get even when Al promotes his shows, like it, and I watch some of his stuff, his solo stuff, and I don't get like a Beach Boy brand vibe that I do with Mike. And so I think if he were to, whether it's passes away or God forbid, or he just decides to stop for some reason, I don't see anybody else picking up that torch because he's been carrying it for so long, and I don't know that anybody could do it better than him. There's nobody else to do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Especially in that time period early on after Carl had died, from about 99 to whenever they had released not the Man in California, but the one prior to that in 2006, where they're still trying to figure, their image again after Carl died, who was this big leader for them. Yeah. And they have Mike and Bruce, and Dave comes back for that run in 99. And David Beard had mentioned how that was a rough time for David Morris at that time. And then they're moving on, and you're like, okay, now this is the show. This is what's going to happen. You're not going to see Brian. Al's not here. We sort of push through. So I think that aspect, although people know of it, but it's not greatly appreciated. So in the sense, I think that it would die. I don't want to say anything against Bruce. Bruce is a great musician. I was shocked to see in the article when he had written a song for The Weeknd that he still surfs at nearly 80. I don't know how true that is. I don't know if it's him saying he.
Yeah. What does that look like exactly?
Yeah. And I don't want to go after him about that. I wouldn't want to go after him about that because I wouldn't want him to attack me and him say this stuff and go after. Matt, what about you though? Do you see it ending?
I agree with Greg about that, and I also, to your point, to your last question about the big stadiums and playing. If I could go back to that real quick, in 1980, the Beach Boys started those DC concerts. I think one of them still holds a record. They played for over 1 million people. In 85, they played Live Aid, and it was huge, And I even think up into the mid 90s, they were playing big stadiums. What I really believe changed was, again, when we talked about it earlier, but when Carl passed and Al stepped back, I think just for a lot of people, it wasn't the same anymore. The soul of the Beach Boys was gone. And, but I will give Mike Love credit for keeping the brand. We talked on our show the other night with Rob Figlio, because he actually played in both bands. And he said Mike Love's concert's more of a party feel, the crowd's more involved. He talks more to the crowd, Brian barely says anything, it's more artsy with Brian, let's listen to the music. The only thing I will say is I could see to keep the performances going, because both bands have so many wonderful musicians.
Yes.
I could see them maybe coming together and not calling themselves the Beach Boys, but maybe the Beach Boys tribute or something of the Beach Boys, and go out and play, and again, I don't expect that would be to huge crowds, but both those bands have really amazing musicians, so I might see that, but as far as going to see the Beach Boys, I don't see Al taking that over or Brian, no, I think Greg's right. I think it's over.
Similar to like the Grateful Dead, how they still play today, although they have a different name and the main guy isn't there anymore, and they're playing with John Mayer, which is another thing in itself. It's weird concept. And I agree with you with the Mike and Brian dynamic in terms of audience interaction, because Mike definitely is the more jokester, the comic, talking to people back and forth. And when Stamos is there, he's joking with him. And with Brian, and I'll give you an example. When I saw him the second time in October with my dad, it was one of the first few things he said, that every time Brian would end the song, he'd say, let's say it's Little Deuce Coupe, and he'd finish, Little Deuce Coupe, everyone, Little Deuce Coupe. And we're like, well, we know it's Little Deuce Coupe. You just sang it. But that was really the only thing he would say, whereas Mike is the one who's sweating because he's running around or walking around and talking and whatnot, getting everyone to put their phones in the air when Surfer Girl comes on. And it's a different dynamic, which I'll definitely be lost in that sense. Like the music though, and this is one of the last few questions I'll ask. Although the band, when the time comes and they're called up, that ends, but the music will always be here. In terms of you and your show, how far in advance do you see it going in terms of what you're putting out, and then realizing you sort of reached as much as we can say about this group before you sort of, say this is the finale?
That's a really good question, because I think we talk about that all the time when we're coming up with show stuff. It's like, how much could, like, what could we, when would we finally exhaust everything to talk about? And I think the more I think about it now that you asked the question, I think I think Matt and I could probably talk about the Beach Boys for the rest of our lives, because to us, and I think to most fans, whether you're revisiting an old album or it's real cyclical. Like there were times where I would completely destroy a record because I played it so much. And then for 5 years, I wouldn't listen to it again. And then you come back to it and it has a completely different sound and feel and vibe. And you kind of mentioned it before, but with the Irving Azoff purchase and with Capitol still putting out stuff, I think there's going to be plenty to talk about for years to come. And, I think that's why, once again, I think for my brother and I, we've always stressed that the pinnacle is not to get Brian Wilson on or Al Jardine on. That would be like, I would poop and throw up at the same time.
Course,
that would be amazing. Like I'd pass out because it'd be an absolute dream to talk with any of those guys. But it can't be the end all be all, because there's so much more to talk about.
Very much, yeah.
And so I don't think that there's probably a limit. Now there may be a limit to people that want to watch that, but as far as me and Matt are concerned, I don't think that there's a limit to what we could come up with that's fun and engaging, because this band is so diverse and has so much music that we haven't even talked about yet. I mean, you could legitimately spend like half a season on one album if we wanted to, on Pet Sounds alone, you could spend an entire year digging through, just the history and the players and the music and contextually what it did at the time. So I don't think so, but I could be wrong, Nolan. I'm probably wrong, to be honest.
How about you, Matt?
Matt, what do you think? I want to know what you think, Matt.
Well, I agree with pretty much everything you said. And what I would add to it is that, one of the neat things about our show is every now and then we get messages that say, I'm going to buy this album because of you. I'm going to get this book. I'm going to do this. And so I think the hope too is that as we go, we get some new people hooked onto the Beach Boys. And as you know, Nolan, once you get hooked, it's a rabbit hole that just keeps going and going and going. And so I think that helps us as well, because there's always things to talk about. There's always interesting things. Again, our show is about the music of the Beach Boys and the legacy. Yeah. And the other thing that I really want to stress that Greg said is that as these copyright things keep, getting closer and closer, they're going to keep putting out more box sets and more unreleased things. And so we'll always have that stuff to talk about,
Yeah. I'll say one more thing, Nolan, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I think this is probably, Matt, I think this might be even more importantly why I think it could work is, Matt and I have made a lot of legit friends. Nolan, and Claire Bear and Les, Joyce and Stacy and Fred, like all these folks that hang out with us every Tuesday. It's kind of becoming, I'm not going to say less about the music, because it's still about the Beach Boys and the music, but I would venture to say that I think as the community grows, if we're lucky enough to grow it and the bonds get tighter and we start to become even better friends with folks, I'm hoping that I think it becomes more about the get together and the chat, and it doesn't really matter what we're talking about. I mean, it has to be structured in some way and somewhat relevant and intriguing.
Course,
but I mean, I would hope that a lot of people join us every week because we just all enjoy each other's company, and it's fun. It's a place to go and hang out, you know. People still drink thousands of years, hang out at bars thousands of years with why there's a million other things you could be doing. I think it's just because people like getting together with other people that like the same things. And I think that'll be a pretty big drive. I hope it's going to be a driving force for the show as the more we go down it.
And I think in that aspect specifically, but I also want to mention, talking about rabbit holes, Matt, I'm not jealous about it, especially in this arena where it's someone else, two other people are heavy Beach Boy fans. When I was getting more into it, I created a playlist on my phone, Spotify, I'm not Apple Music, of just Beach Boy stuff. And the total amount, and I'm not just saying it, it's 9.5 hours long of just hundreds of Beach Boy songs. It's a whole mess.
And it's all shortening bread.
Yes, just short bread, ding ding, and all those at Sumahama and Here Comes the Night, the 48. Yeah. No, but a lot of it's some of it's a lot of just albums that I just have saved to it that I might not necessarily listen to those songs a lot, but some of them that I listen to. Looking back on it, I mean, when you started it, how much of it did you realize, like, wow, I'm gonna be able to talk to these people, or was it just now where you're like, man, I'm just so lucky?
Yeah, I don't think Matt, I won't speak for Matt. I'll say that it all started with Fred, because Fred was no, it didn't. It started with Robert White Johnson, because Robert was a friend. We had been friends in Nashville, because Matt and I were both in Nashville for a long time doing music. And I had known him, but Nolan, I never thought we would ever get to talk with the people that we've gotten to talk with. Because in our eyes, and maybe not to people outside the Beach Boy world, but since I was little, David Leaf and David Beard and Rob Bonfiglio, Matt Jardine, all these guys we've had on the show are celebrities to us. And so I never once thought that we'd ever get the chance to talk with them. And then two, I don't necessarily assume that it's going to continue to happen. I think every show, we're always grateful for the time we got to spend with these really unique, amazing, humble people. And we just keep hoping for the best, that we can continue to bring on cool guests. But yeah, no, I never thought I'd ever get to talk with any of these people. It's cool.
Yeah. I think when we first started our first show, I don't even think it's up anywhere, but I think we had like 3 people watching, and and
seriously,
and Greg was so, optimistic and said, hey man, it would just grow. We'll just keep doing it. Yeah. And when we first talked about doing the show, we never even talked about having guests on. It was always one of those things like, that'd be awesome if we could interview somebody one day, but it really did happen kind of organically where, Greg had Robert White Johnson, a friend, he came on, and that kind of opened up some doors because when you start advertising for that, you bring in other people to watch. And then I think the other really big one that helped us was Fred Vale. And I knew Fred Vale in Nashville. I had met him years ago, and he took me to his studio and he told me that story about when he listened to Pet Sounds with Brian and all that. And, and so, but no, we're very, very blessed. I'm honored with everybody we've spoken to and everybody we've met, Nolan, including you, just to meet like-minded fans of the Beach Boys. It's been, if it ended today, I'd be sad, but I would be very grateful because all these people we've gotten to speak to, I never would have thought in a million years it would happen, that we're actually interviewing these guys. But even on top of that, it's just to know that there's really other hardcore fans of the Beach Boys out there that kind of get it the way we get it, because I told you, Greg and I were always on an island, and it's like, we'd be talking about it and they'd be like, what are you guys talking about? Stop talking. You guys are dumb, the Beach Boys, and now it's nice to have that kind of support system that way. So again, I feel very grateful and hope it will continue. Yep.
Yeah. I think we've finished off, I don't know how many shows, Matt, but I think more times than I can even remember, I think we've finished a show, and I think we both have said at some point in the conversation, I think if it all ended for some reason, like if people are like, okay, this show sucks, we don't want to watch it anymore, we would be totally thrilled at the experiences we've had up to this point. It's been really cool, man.
And I think at this moment as well, although Bobby, big time drummer, he's not with the Beach Boys, he hasn't been with them since '88. But even that situation, from whether it's your perspective where your show is a more niche oriented to the Beach Boys, even in that, it's like, oh my gosh, what you message that person, they say, oh yeah, I'll do it definitely, and then you have them on. It's like, what has just happened, and how am I gonna be able to make sure what I'm doing next week is improved? And it's sort of like, this is what makes it so much better. And I think, which is at the end of the day, the overarching theme for the Beach Boys is that they had love and respect and appreciation from the fans. So they're not someone necessarily who's super overconfident or someone who is holding themselves to this high standard where they're at the Beatles height, where they're, only maybe necessarily doing stuff with a Rick Rubin or something like that, where they not putting time towards people like ourselves who are doing this because they love it so much. With that being said, I want to end with a little segment. So, because I know we've been doing this for a while, and I appreciate entirely that you stuck this long, but
oh man, this has been fun. Like I said, we could talk about the Beach Boys forever, man.
Of course. No, so this segment, new sort of for this episode, this or that. So I'll throw out a few topics or Beach Boy related things that I'll just say whether you like this or this one or that. So
let's go. I'm excited. Woo!
Sunflower or Surf's Up?
Sunflower.
An all living Wilson Brothers group, or all the core members of the band alive and playing together still?
Like, is it Carl like coming back from the dead?
So if it was Carl, if let's say Carl and Dennis were still alive, they either played with Brian, it was those three with Brian's band, or all the core members plus David still playing together to this day if they were alive.
No, hold on. You got to set this up again. Sorry. What? Okay, so
Brian, Dennis, and Carl. If Brian and Carl were alive, if they were alive playing with just Brian, or if it was a similar situation to the 50th, except Carl and Dennis were still alive and they had still been playing past when they both had passed.
Is this a trick question?
No.
So I think you're saying all the Beach Boys alive still performing, or just the three Wilson brothers breaking off and performing?
Yeah,
they were still alive.
Yeah,
I would say all the Beach Boys. I'd say the band.
Although that would be
how cool would it be
for sure if they had done like just a Wilson's thing. You know, I don't know. Is that what you're saying?
No,
definitely all the Beach Boys.
Yeah, definitely. They had that, with that Nebworth concert, which Bobby always loves. It says how much he loves. Where that was the last time until 2012, and then unfortunately Carl and Dennis weren't there. The next one, this may be a little bit more, I don't want to say negative.
Is that true? Really? That was their?
Yeah, that's what it says on at least the Wikipedia page, and that was their last one where all the living.
Nolan, you know more than I do. I didn't. Is that really true?
That's at least that's
can you
what it says
confirm?
on Wikipedia.
They played. I'm pretty sure they played.
That's pretty
well, at least with that iteration of the group.
I think Dennis's last shows were in 83.
Right.
But
that makes sense.
But it could be, it could be though with that, like
Brian
you said, with those particular members.
Yeah, because Brian had been on and off. I think at
that on and off. Yeah.
So this one though.
Wow. Wow.
which definitely speaks to the quality of them, that it took them that long for obviously when David joined them. But Still Cruising or Stars and Stripes Volume 1?
Still Cruising.
Oh yeah, Still Cruising.
Is there a version of a song on Stars and Stripes that you like if you've listened to the album?
No.
Not even Willie singing Warmth of the Sun?
No.
I haven't. I've heard that one. I've heard Lori Morgan, Don't Worry Baby. I've heard Toby Keith. I don't know if that's on Volume 1 or 2, but I have not listened to those. Those might be two albums Greg and I never do a deep dive on. I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. But
I wish they hadn't done a deep dive.
Oh, there isn't a Volume 2?
There isn't a Volume 2. And I think there's a reason, because now I think it was Summer in Paradise that only sold 1,000 copies. But
is that true?
I read that on Wikipedia.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true. Yeah.
Because when they not submitted, but when they redid Surf's Up in 2001, where they re-released it, that was left. Summer in Paradise was left off of the re-release of albums.
The twofers. That was the only one that didn't get a CD.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so the Beach Boys 1985. The Beach Boys 1985 album or Summer in Paradise?
Oh, 85.
Yeah, 85.
And then this one you've had Bobby on. I know how you said you wanted Billy on. Unfortunately, he passed. Bobby Figueroa or Billy Hinchy singing "Sail on Sailor"?
Ooh.
Oh man. For me, from the video clips I've heard, all due respect to Billy, but I think Bobby, to me sounds a little bit better on that tune to me.
Yeah, and believe it or not, Greg and I do disagree on things, but I agree with him on this too. There's that one clip. Bobby's in front of the
audience. I've only seen
I haven't seen that many of them.
Billy twice and Bobby once do it. That's it. But I think Bobby does a better job.
Yeah. And I had mentioned that to him, that clip of the Queen Mary concert where he sings that in the audio. The engineer hadn't properly set the microphone because that was the last minute thing. I think for me though, I think in that situation, I mean, I think definitely Bob. And I think in that situation, how it was set up definitely sets it apart from Billy, because Billy's was more of, I don't want to say a sign, but it was sort of expected in the sense that he was going to play that one. Well, man, Greg, I want to say sincerely though, and not just as a fan of your program, but thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It means a great deal. And this is all, in all honesty, regardless of how long you guys been doing your show, I think for you to have these people on and continually to have amazing people on definitely is not improvement for me, but motivation in terms of reaching out to those similar people that have on, because that's what it was all about for me. But no, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for me. It was great fun.
Oh man, are you kidding? What an honor to be here with you, Nolan. Man, it's been good to get to know you, just on the show, and dude, you got a great thing going as well. I think it's such a cool thing to do, I mean, the internet and technology is amazing. You can connect with a lot of different people. So you keep at it. Sure. We'll keep at it, man. We got to have you on the show. Also, Matt, hey, Nolan, can we, we'll give you credit on the show, but Matt, we should do a segment and we're going to call it all this or that.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm not in the mood to sue people for certain stuff. So I'm not gonna do that.
Then you're a friend of ours. Then I'd love doing that. Yeah. The question is, how would you do it, but with chat interaction? Sorry, I know you're trying to exit out here.
No. I now, as I usually do, as I like to say, if you enjoyed watching and listening, depending on what platform you subscribe, follow, like, comment, share,
yes, everybody,
yes, do it.
Go subscribe. Hey, we need to link this.
Years from now, this is gonna blow up, of course, like Joe Rogan's podcast. So when you look back 10 years from now, say, "Holy shit, this was amazing." You're gonna want to tune in now. As I usually like to do, I give the floor to you both to plug anything and everything that you have for your show and anything else that you feel like sharing.
Well, Nolan, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting us. You're real impressive. This was great. It's really nice to see somebody like you doing something like this. I wish you all the best. And I would just say, as far as a plug, if those of you out there, we're Beach Boys Talk, we're on, Facebook Live, Twitch, and YouTube. We stream every Tuesday at 8 Eastern. I'm sorry. You guys are going to tune in late. But come join us. We just love to talk about the Beach Boys, but definitely, Nolan, you got a great thing going here. So we're glad to be a part of it. Thank you.
Of course. Well, in the words
also, Matt, I want to plug something for Matt. Matt has an album coming out it's called Fuller, the Fuller House. And it's all songs around that era, and Matt's going to cover them and sing them, and
Jesse and the Ripper covers. That's all it is.
All Jesse and the Ripper covers. That's
excellent.
Right.
Well, in the words of a famous drummer that people on this right now know, sail on, sailor. And in the words of Johnny Carson, I bid you a heartfelt good night until see you again next week.